Welcome back. Let's understand how we can extract JSON fields from Mule event. As part of our case study, the first system API we are going to build is UHub S API. In this, we are having 4 REST services. Those are register COVID case, update COVID case, get COVID case by SSN, and get COVID reports. This register COVID case input data will come as JSON payload, and for update COVID case the input payload will come as XML, and to get COVID case by SSN will come as URI parameter, and to get COVID reports the input data will come as query parameters. So to get experience with all type of input data, I have chosen different ones. And coming to the register COVID case, we are going to send a JSON payload which looks like this. And the request URL that we are going to develop looks like this. Domain name, base path as COVID, and subpath as v1/cases. Let's do the development of register COVID case in this session to extract a JSON field from payload. Let's go to the Endpoint Studio, click on File, New, Mule project, choose name as UHub-S API, say finish. By default, it generated a configuration file same as application name, but we would like to have the flow name as register COVID case. Let's rename it to register COVID case. Okay. To develop a REST service, go to HTTP module, drag and drop a listener connector as event source, and create the configuration. So it is going to be HTTP localhost 8081 and choose a base path as COVID. Okay. And choose subpath as v1/cases, and method is going to be post based. Let's save it and drag and drop a logger connector. First we will print complete payload, then we will come back and we will try to extract one field from the payload. Simply click on FX and write payload. We discussed, right? The body that we are going to send over request comes under payload of message structure. Let me run this application. The application is going to deploy. Meanwhile, let me form the input request. It is going to be post based method, and the request should be HTTP localhost 8081 COVID/v1/cases. And to send a JSON payload from Postman, we should choose body and choose raw. Under this drop down, we should choose JSON. Go to our document and get the incoming JSON payload. Keep into body section and we can see this payload. Let's say send. Here we can see the input payload printed in the log. So whenever we send any data over body, we should extract this from payload. Now to get a specific field from this payload, we should write payload.fieldName. So simply to get the source, I can write it as payload.source. Let's save it Let the application get redeployed. The application has deployed and started. Let's clear the console and go to Postman, send the request again. We can see it printed as hospital 1. That means we could able to extract field from JSON payload using payload.selector. Let me run this application in debugging mode and show you the complete Mule message structure how we are getting. The application has deployed and prospective changed to debugging mode. Let's go to Postman, make a request, and the request came and it is waiting on the logger. If we look at on left top, whatever we see here is the Mule message structure. Under Mule message structure we discussed, right? It contains attributes, it contains payload, and it contains variables. If we expand the attributes, we can see these many attributes came over the request. Those are listener path, local address, and request path, method. Any query params came? No. Any URI params came? No. And if we look at payload, if I simply click on this payload, we can able to see the incoming payload over here. In previous sessions, we are discussing about Mule debugger expression. So this is useful to execute these Mule data view expressions to see the input data. Simply if I say payload, it will print the payload. If I wanted to fetch specific value, I can make use of payload dot value and say evaluate. It will print that value. If I would like to print any another, I can simply say case type, so that it will give the case type value. And we look at this payload, it is a nested JSON object. We have root element and again inside it we have another object. If we would like to get something from this, we should write expression as per the traversing. That means if I write simply payload dot address, it will print the complete address object. Among it, if we would like to get a specific value, simply we need to write the traversing selector as payload dot address dot the specific field, say evaluate. So this is how the expression builder helps us to check or to write a small piece of data view code to see or to get a specific value from the payload. So every time we use payload to get a specific field from the incoming payload. That's all about this session. We will see how we can extract XML fields from a payload in next session. Thank you. Happy learning.